Yeah, thank you for inviting me for a lecture in the context of the summer school with people who are so highly interested in survey methodology, and I hope I will tell you some new insights and some inspiration for some other research. At the beginning, I want beg your pardon and to excuse me that I start now to read a manuscript and not to be very free, because I decided actually that I wanted to listen to my argument and not to my problems with English language. This lecture actually I did 2 weeks ago in a conference, but in that I had only 15 minutes time. So this is the usual slot in conferences. So this makes sometimes stuff very easy. You had 8 slides and you go through and tell something and the job is done. But now we have a lot of time. This is a luxury, but this is also a challenge to really to develop the argument in a precise way that you can follow and understand and get some message home. So the first part actually was introduced by Silke. That I'm actually in charge in this department, which is located in the Mannheim house of the Leibniz Institute. And this department of monitoring society and social change has one focus. Its focus is in supporting research in using governmental data sets for secondary data analysis. And I'm in charge for those data which are collected by means of standardized diaries. And there are 2 main types of diary-based surveys, namely income and expenditure surveys and time use surveys. And today, I will present some preliminary results of my research, actually ongoing research, on the quality of time use data by analyzing the effects of the time of filling in a standardized diary. But first, let me give you some short clues on time use surveys in general. Time use surveys are aimed at capturing the amount of time which is spent for actual behavioral activities over 24 hours of a day in national populations. Worldwide, there are about 74 countries whose national statistics did and do conducting time use surveys. Usually, participants are asked to keep a diary over several days. The number of days is different in different countries. There are guidelines of the European Communities for a harmonized European time survey, in abbreviation the HETUS project, which recommends a 2-day diary with 1 weekend, with 1 weekday, Monday to Friday, and 1 weekend day, Saturday or Sunday. It also recommended that data be collected year-round, or covering all the year, using for each day a 10-minute intervals for the entries, and an open system of self-reporting activities. So every respondent has no code, but just he's free to write down the type of activity he has in mind for the specific time slots. I refer to this recommendation because they actually are kind of a condensed list of to-dos condensed out of the processes of the practices in the different countries doing time use surveys. In addition to the diary, at the end of the survey data, data on socioeconomic status and subjective well-being are also collected by a normal standardized questionnaire. Sampling in time use surveys is a special issue, because not only population sampling is needed, but also time sampling to get a representation of the activities all over a year with its subcycles like seasons and weeks and weekdays. This latter aspect has to be taken into account when you go to define the data set for your empirical analysis. time use surveys usually are based on a relatively large data set. For example, the German time use survey is based on the participation of 5,000 households, which means about 12,000 participants, because the decision is not just one person per household, but all persons are aged over 16, age over 15, 16 and older. So the total household participates actually on the time use survey. And because of that, and because of the other reasons of this, the coding of the free entries, the data collection is quite costly. It means some burden to the respondents. So in many cases of the surveys worldwide, quota sampling instead of probability sampling is used. And finally, the classification of the freely entered activities is crucial, because participants ask to report their activities freely, not by using a standard classification code system. This classification is then applied by coders in the institutes, and they develop a classification system focusing on everyday activities, which means actually a high granularity for home and leisure activities, and less for job and educational activities. To make this more concrete, for example, in the German case, we have a classification system of activities of about 190 activity codes. And of this 190 activities, about 120 activities cover household and leisure time activities. Okay, so now let's go back to the diary method, as it is the core of the time use survey. On this slide, you see an excerpt of the recommended diary form, which is, in this case, is a kind of paper and pencil device. You see, I think it's not very good readable, but at the left, now I have to be careful here at this side, you see some entries. These are 10 minutes intervals. Each line is a 10-minute interval to be filled in with several informations for this 10 minutes interval. And these informations are the main activity, what did you do in this time? The second is the secondary activity, multitasking. What did you, while you were cooking, did you were playing with children, for example? The third column is the location of doing the activity. And finally, there are some columns where you can add or note the persons, people which were being present while doing this activity. This excerpt is now one page for the time block from 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock. And this is the second page. The first page starts from 4 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock. So over 24 hours, this means you have a booklet of 8 pages, which has to be filled in. And you can imagine that filling in this type of self-report log need some specific instructions. So they give instructions. This is a page of instructions, recommended instructions again, but this is really the core actually of what they did. I don't want to go now through all these instructions and their efficiency in understanding and so on. We could test this by cognitive tests. This is another issue. I want just highlight one which seems of special importance. I highlighted this in yellow. And I think it's difficult to read, but I will tell you what this means. You see, at the beginning, right at the beginning of these instructions, participants are told when to fill in the diary. And this demand, when to fill the diary, is repeated and at the end of the sheet by larger and bold letters. So what here is written, it is the participants are expected to take the diary, the booklet during the day with them and fill it in now and then, when they have a spare moment of time. And this seems an approach which tries to get close to the ideal of a concurrent, of a real-time measurement of practice participants. So this is the ideal. And as I mentioned, at the end of the survey, of going all through these days, which have to be filled in with a diary, follows a questionnaire, standardized normal questionnaire. And besides questions on social demographic status and some questions on satisfaction with specific life domains, the participants are also asked when they actually did the job of filling in. When did you fill in the diary? So, yeah. And the scale is now and then during the diary day, at the end of the diary day, the day after the diary day, or later about some, you can write in how many days after the diary day. It seems obvious that with postponing filling in the diary tool relative to the occurrence of the activities, the defined diary day, memory effects come into play. As more retrospection is needed, the span is longer. So we have a situation where diaries are used for getting accurate data on time use, but obviously retrospective bias might enter because filling in the diary might be postponed. So the issue of retrospective bias come into the issue. And this is a thing, maybe you discussed this and you know, in social surveys and in social survey methodology, experiments and research on this problem, which also was in the past and a research area of GESIS and SUMA, and there are some publications on that by Norbert Schwarz. I will cite them later. There are some results on this issue, but to my knowledge at least, research on retrospective bias is focused on standard self-reports about behavioral frequencies for some specified period of time. So how often did you watch TV, or what is the frequency of playing with children in the last week, and so on. And I think Schwarz and colleagues did some research on that issue, finding that retrospection leads easily to biased self-reports because of limited memory and social desirability mechanisms. So out of this research, not so recent, maybe 5 years ago, Schwarz comes in a publication to demanding more real-time measurement of overt behaviors and also of covered behaviors, evaluations and effects. I think this is a background in research methodology which is, to my feeling, to my opinion, not yet at the focus of social surveys. There is now I leave a little bit my text, there is an ongoing growing community of psychological and clinical researchers under the heading of ambulatory assessment, which follow this methodological principle of real-time measurement, everything. Yeah. And how do they solve this with a specific method is another issue, but which I not go into detail because this is another theme. This is one. But on the other side, Schwarz participated in the development of the day reconstruction method in cooperation with Daniel Kahneman. Maybe you know Daniel Kahneman, psychologist, economist, Nobel Prize winner. And he, with his colleagues, they invented this DRM, the day reconstruction method, as a tool again, which is aimed at measuring the time of feelings and moods over the day, actually aimed at measuring, at measuring these feelings and moods over the day to finally come to calculate a time-based U index or unpleasantness index, a tool actually for, this is a big issue, concept of proposing an alternative national well-being index. So the message I want to tell is that they actually relied on retrospective self-reports in this daily reconstruction method. And this is pretty similar to what we see here as the way of filling in the day after. So people have to remember what was going on the last day with a specific instruction how to do this, to make actually a diary by retrospective memory, which kind of activities were practiced all over the day. Exactly the same what we see in this diary excerpt. And then, and this is so to say the core interest of Kahneman, they were asked, when you did cooking, what was your feeling then? And when you were playing with your children, what was your feeling and mood? And then they have a category, a list, a scale of moods. Interestingly for me is that, so to say, they relied on filling in the diary the day after the diary. And of course, they did some validation and report high validity of activities, time use for specific activities measured by their method compared to data which were captured by the so-called experience sampling method, or the ecological momentary assessment, which I mentioned just with this ambulatory assessment community. Experience sampling means actually you are, by some device, get repeatedly over the day a short questionnaire which are focused on asking you, what did you just now, or the last minute? What kind of activity, where were you, which people were present, and what was your mood? And because, of course, this opens the possibility to get also information on feelings and evaluations and so on. So, you see, we have on the one side the retrospection bias, on the other side we have some positive solution in support of the day after the diary retrospection as a valid tool. And, but the issue, the question of does the postponement interval between the diary day and filling in the diary, if this does matter, there's little, actually there's no, to my knowledge, there's no publication or research. Maybe my search was not hard enough, but a colleague who is a Netherlands colleague who is also very interesting now here, they are putting some stress, some resources on developing electronic app-based diaries. So he also looked at the publications, and so he didn't find really results in this specific issue using a diary, and what does it have kind of effects if you do this immediately over the day or with some postponement. And of course, this is a good starting point for doing research because others did not this research yet, and you have some information maybe with the data. So this was a kind of excursus. Now I want to tell you about my research approach and then some preliminary findings. You give me a sign if I'm approaching to the end, or just go on. Yeah?
Tell me like at 7:30 at the latest if you're not finished by then.
Okay. So I think I did tell you something on that. And these are actually now the starting question, the leading research questions for my research. Does the retrospectively filling in diary tool affect time use indicators? And which activities, we have a lot of activities in this comprehensive way of this time use surveys, actually are mostly affected. So I do a secondary data analysis of a given time use data, the German data set of the year which was conducted in 2000 and 2001. Usually they start in the middle of a year and cover the 1 year until the next mid of the year. And the most recent time use in survey in Germany was conducted in 2012 and 13. Last year it was finished. But there's no scientific access. I think there's no really access to the microdata. And one reason is, of course, of this coding, of this classification of all the activities. So, but this is one task for GESIS, to look and to get in contact, to stay in contact with the Bureau of National Statistics, to get as soon as possible access to this data for the research community. So I told you 5,000 households, 13,000 persons about. They keep, wait a minute. These participants keep diary for 3 consecutive days with a prescribed starting day. This sample is stratified by month, and this 3 days block. Each household member, age over 15, participated, and we have this classification code list next to this. So let's first have a look on the prevalence of the time filling in the diary according to scale. And you see this, what you see this about 35 to 45% only filled in the diary now and then, they told us. And about 25 at the end of the day, 15 to 25% the day after the diary day, and about 10% or some days later. And you see the prevalence of postponing, the tendency of postponing the filling in increased by diary day, which means the participants postpone it the next day, more if it was the second time to fill in the diary, and the third time even more. So this is another interesting factor which might be used later for introducing motivational factors in bias. So now we could go straight forward to the analysis, but there is a problem with time use data, which I want a little bit to highlight to make it more concrete. Let me see if I have an animated graph, so I hope, look if it is working. Yeah. So we have on the one side the time of filling in the diary with these 4 categories, and we have on the other side we have the reported time, the reported activity time use. And what we do actually with this data, we can calculate a covariation. And if we find, this time of filling in, this is actually is a kind of indicator of the time span of retrospection, the distance, the retrospective distance to the to the occurrence of the activities. So if we found a negative effect, so we could interpret this as a negative bias. So the longer the time distance, the longer the retrospective, so if it is negative, this is the bias leads to underreporting because of memory restrictions. But it could be also a positive effect. So, this could be interpreted out of the context of social desirability, which means if you also have a social desirability in this context would mean that you report more time with specific activity because you think this is more consistent with your self-concept. This is so to say, the the basic mechanism. One could argue if this is really the mechanism which is going on effective in this type of situation where the respondent is doing some kind of self-administered survey. So this would be a straightforward interpretation. The problem starts with this aspect that reported time use might be also, or not, is also an indicator for the time load by an activity. So assuming that this is really consistent, there's no error. So if you say I have this day I spend so much time for preparing meals and this means actually your time is occupied by this activity. And because of that, you might postpone the filling in the questionnaire now and then. Yeah? So they have a positive effect by this reason. And all these effects actually are in this correlation, in this covariation, because we have no causal order and we have no other data using as a gold standard to control this. So what can we do? We can do as what I did actually. I tried to minimize this confounding, this confounding of, let's say, the bias interpretation and the postponing interpretation of the filling in effect. And I did this by several decisions on managing or defining the data set. First, so these are all the decisions I just go through. First, I cut out the original data to a subgroup of people with basically similar time budget, namely those people who are fully employed or fully in educational or military track. So this is a specific budget, so this is a specific way of life. Second, I confined the data set to Saturday activities. The reason for focusing on Saturday activities was that I assumed Saturday being a day with the most activity variation, making it mostly susceptible to retrospective bias. So it is different if you have a working day full of job and you have now a later category, I was working and nothing else happened, so this is not really a challenging situation for remembering how many hours, how many time did you use for this activity. So further, I limited the data to the first of the 3 diary days to have a more homogeneous motivation in filling in the diary. Finally, I decided to analyze separately several indicators of time use, not only the mainstream indicator of total amount of time used for some activity, but additionally the number of episodes of an activity which were reported, which means the number of episodes, the intervals, and further if an activity was mentioned at all, which I call in this context prevalence, and finally the total number of different activities at this day. And in relation to the type of activity, I have to decide which activities I want to analyze. I decided for a kind of a middle level of granularity. This leads me to 48 activity classes. So I did my covariation analysis separately 48 times for each activity. And these activities are these ones. It's just very fast: sleeping, eating, dressing, main job, pauses in the job, secondary job, so some related to the job, much more on households, as I told you. Let me see here. Cleaning, washing, plants care, repairing, car care, shopping, teleshopping, caring for the kids, caring for adults, and as I mentioned before, quite many classes of leisure time activities, socializing, telephone calls, cultural events, you can imagine, also sport, waiting, walking, and so on. And video watching, TV watching, so all the bunch of activities in leisure time. So I think now we are ready to look at some results which were provided by this approach. And first I show you results for the total time of each activity, the total time. And this is the table. So it's a pity you cannot read. It is not necessary to read the coefficients. Actually, the entries in the cells are regression coefficients. So I have made a simple or least square regression. The dependent variable was the total amount of the activity, of this activity, and the independent variables were dummies out of this scale of filling in now and then. This was the reference category, and the other three ones were the three predictors as dummies. And so you see some positive correlations. So these are these positive effects, this light green. And the negative are these ones. And the negative ones, let me go to this. These are activities which seem to be susceptible to retrospective bias, are shopping by telephone, watching TV, and listening to music. So the total amount of these activities seems to depend on when the participants filled in the questionnaire. The later, the less. So they remember not very precise over it. Okay? So let's skip the positive interpretation. I think now we could go into this detail. The positive, is this a bias because of the social desirability, or is it a kind of bias, not bias, caused by postponing, and then having these specific activities, we can start by grounds of plausibility. And so this is the only way to come to a first interpretation. But I will skip this because for me it was interesting that the very first impression is obviously there is no retrospective bias if you look on total amount of time used overall. Some small, some few. So then I repeated this analysis with the number of episodes. If somebody was noting he was watching TV, sometimes he's noted this, I did this from 6 to 7 in the evening, and later from 9 to 11, and then also later from 1 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the morning. So he would have 3 episodes of watching TV. So I counted the number of episodes for each person for over all the 24 hours. And so this is the other table. So in the first few, you see we have more bias, more negative correlation between the number of episodes of an activity and this postponement variable. And this affects affects time use of secondary jobs. I just make the list. Meal preparation is susceptible, it correlates negative. The number of activities, household cleaning, laundry, plants, shopping, all this type of activities which are, I don't know the English words, which are not very, I'm sorry. You see, if you read the list, you get an impression what kind of activities. Doing laundry, plants, care, shopping, socializing, hobbies, gaming, reading books, watching TV, watching video, being at the computer. So if people remember what they did in the last day, so the episode structure gets clumped in less episodes. Yeah. So some episodes actually are, because you actually, when you're doing something, you don't remember, you don't save in your memory. Now I did for the first time, now the second time, the third time, just to say, oh, I watched TV and I did listening music. So this quite clear pattern of underreporting the effect, underreporting effect of the time of filling in, actually lead me then to the last step for the analysis, to look now at the number, the total number of different activities reported for Saturday. So I now went through all these activities and identified for this day how many different activities were reported. And I make some subgroups. So the first approach was summing all of this, out of the 48, how many of them were noted on Saturday. But it seems more better to be interpreted to do this for some subgroups. So I made, oh, sorry, I have some time. I can also, now I skipped one table. Yes, I skipped one table. So this is the episode as a dependent variable. We find some bias, let's say. And now I looked on the prevalence. Which of these activities actually was mentioned at all? Noted. Was laundry making noted, yes or no? Not the episode, just yes or no. Yeah. And now I use logistic regression. And the entries are not the coefficients. In this case, these are the logarithmic coefficients. Difficult to interpret, to read, understand, but we don't look at the quantitative size of the coefficients, actually only on the minus or the plus, the direction of the sign. And what you see is still more clear. So this is the bias, the retrospective bias, by postponing actually has really more effects overall if on noting an activity. Or in other words, the more you postpone the filling in, the more some of the activities get lost. They're missing, they forgot. And these activities, of course, again, in this area of household and leisure activities. Not for the area of job and education activities. You have to remember this was Saturday, so if you were, and some people had a full job on Saturday for some hours, this is not easily forgotten. Okay, and this led me now to make this overall variable of number of different activities. Yeah? Now, I did what I told you just before, so I made a new index and summing up all the activities, different activities on the Saturday, and correlated them with this the filling in variable. And we have this very clear, to my opinion, very clear pattern. What you see here are the coefficients of the regression of the number of household activities. These are the household activities, you know them now. These are the number of the leisure activities, as dependent variable, and this is the effect or the difference of those doing the filling at the end of the day compared to those doing this now and then, or the day after and some days later and some days after, and we have in every case a negative effect, significant, so this is my nomenclature to indicate significance. Bold means significant, 5% probability, and we see a quite linear, consistent increase. The later, the more bias on this different number of different activities. So, now I come to summing up my findings. Actually, I found no or little effects of the time of filling in the diary on the total amount of time used for everyday activities on Saturday. But further then, there seemed to be more retrospection bias on the number of episodes and on the prevalence of activities. Underreporting of number of noted household and leisure activities seems to be pervasively correlated with the time of filling in a diary. Concluding, I would like to state that if a diary is not filled in now and then over the day, there seems to be a clear risk that some activities got missed. Those who remember an activity, who know an activity, are quite accurate in reporting the total used time. And to some extent also the episode time. But there starts some bias. And this result is somehow consistent with the Kahneman findings as in the first view. So in conclusion, if you analyze the total amount of time spent, this is a mainstream indicator full of governmental reports, how many time is used for children care. This is susceptible, this indicator, to activity selection bias, because we see people, because of this timing issue, tend to reduce their memory, to miss some activities. And if you look at the total amount, of course you select only those who have reported some time, who reported some activity, and those who have a zero, so to say, no activity, so you don't include, and this is a problem of limited dependent variable, because we have some people who have not reported, and I think we have now clues that this is really a kind of activity selection bias. So, now, actually, I'm at the end of my presentation. I have some some remarks on further research. So, this is a very first step. It's a long list of what could be done further with this type of data. So, I think of course, one can look at the secondary activities, at the locations, and of others being present in this dynamic time of being reported, to see if the bias is still stronger. Or one could increase the granularity of the activity classes. For example, we have just one activity type, which was caring kids care. But the data, we have data differentiating this activity class into personal care of the kids, supervising their homework, games and sports together with the children, talking with the children, cuddling with the children, taking children to meetings, healthcare, and reading out and telling them tales. All this different. So, and this by time. And now I think it would be very interesting to see if this postponement of filling in shouldn't have really large effects on this time structure of these activities. And so on, and finally, I just skip all the possibilities to go into detail. Of course, other weekdays could be used and should be used, Sunday and Monday or Friday. Actually, we do exploratory work, research on this situation. Also statistical methods are asked. We could do more sophisticated modeling by multi-level and multivariate regression. You see, what I did here by trying to minimize the confoundation to make the situation clear for interpretation could be done also by adding, modeling a large equation with controlling for all other factors which might control this confoundation. But actually, it would be only just a trial. So now I'm pretty at the end of my research, but I have a last page to read. I would like to address some implications, which comes into my mind, into my background, implications which diaries, as a data collection tool, might have for the future of survey methodology. This diary grid actually is a device. In this case, it's the kind of traditional paper and pencil device. And it is obvious that it can, and in some local studies, it is transformed to an electronic device using online cloud services or mobile apps. But the aspect of integrating a device in social surveys reaches, to my opinion, beyond the optimization of an instrument. There is an ongoing electronic and web technology development which gives birth to devices and systems for continuous real-time capturing of behaviors. by utilizing the sensors of a smartphone or other wearable gadgets, and also for, of course, your behavior in the digital cosmos, in the digital virtual world. But it is not virtual, it is actually real, but it is digital. And there is a growing trend spreading this kind of devices, by which not only overt behavior, but also covert behavior, let's say attitudes, can be captured by recording and analyzing objective data, analyzing skeletomotorical and physiological signals. So it might be only a matter of time until there is a broad availability and social acceptance of this kind of devices is then reached, and maybe then they got at least a standard part of a survey methodology. You see, this is a large perspective. Maybe you can say this is a dream. So this may be a look beyond the far horizon, but as GESIS is used to look beyond the edge of a plate, it supported recently the development of a wristband. And Silke mentioned it, with psychophysiological sensors. And this actually led to a startup company called Body Monitor. And this is my last. So if you want to have a look at the future, have a look at bodymonitor.de. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. If those might be the kind of activities that are also dropped from a busy day. So if I have a very busy day, maybe those would be the kinds of activities that I would not do and just postpone to the next day, maybe?
The term is the busy day. So we have actually no independent information if this day was busy. This is, you go in this direction of making the situation kind of homogeneous. Yeah. So actually there is a question to the participants if this day was normal or not normal. So this goes in this direction. Yeah. And this could be used as an indicator of day of hassles and stress and so on. But I don't know what does this mean normal. Yeah, this might be this was a birthday or a happy day, or so I make some exploration. This was not very promising in the results. So another approach would be now to look at the weekdays. So yeah, starting, you see, it's a kind of indirect approach to compare the Monday versus the Friday as the last day. Yeah, so I make also the same tables for Wednesday to say, okay, now I want to look at a normal working day. So because this is another situation. Yeah. So, but this is ongoing research.
The interesting question, of course, there's endogeneity in these data, right? I mean, that's very hard to disentangle. When people forget things, you cannot identify the busy day anymore. So yeah, good question, but really difficult to address empirically, right? Further questions from the floor? Yeah.
Maybe just commenting on that, I thought in the same direction as you that it would be more, it could be self-selection, or the hypothesis would be self-selection into filling out the diary directly, or not having the time to fill it out in the same day, because I have no leisure activities, because maybe some people had to work the whole day, and this of course would make them fill it out the next day. So of course there's an underreporting of leisure because there was no leisure for them. So this could be not directly tested. You can't really, it is a matter of endogeneity, but maybe what you could do is just test this hypothesis directly. Take the reporting as the dependent variable, and the leisure, the structure of leisure or of activities and activity types as independent. Yeah. And I would do that simultaneously, just
okay. I see, this is a good idea.
And there you, maybe it's people who have to work all the time or who are out all day, and you could try to do some hypothesis on the structure of it.
I think that sounds like a great suggestion to turn the equation around to some degree, because yeah, that's one way of looking at endogeneity.
Yes, but if I understood this right, to take as predictors the activities, so to make a comparison between the activities actually. So it's
Not only the activities, also where they take place. So if they're out of the house, for example, or with lots of people, and the other things that you can
so
have.
this points again to the direction of it is busy day. I tried to come close to the busy day by selecting the Saturday, because I think if compare it, but a more empirical approach would be to, have to mention that this is a very promising way of line to take the activities as predictors and to compare the effects of. So if there's a correlation between the type of activity and postponing.
I also have an idea that relates to that, and then I'll give the mic to Ineke. Are you aware of any studies that try to combine the diary method with experience sampling? Because that would also be a way to cross-validate the data.
To combine it, I think no, just only the Kahneman study, and no, but at the moment I know any other studies.
Because that would be really a way to check.
Yes, this would be
simultaneous, like phone calls or text messages or something, where people have to react within a certain time frame to say what they are doing, and then additionally ask them to fill in the diary, and then you could also, it would be possible, but I guess methodological studies in this area are quite rare, right? So, Ineke.
They're not so rare. In the list panel, we conducted a time use survey based on the HEDIS guidelines, but simplified. So we had pre-coded activities. We didn't want people to type in activities on their mobile phone, but next to the time use, and I think we can see when people filled in the diary, and of course they carry their phone with them all day. So it's also easy to keep your diary. And there was experience sampling. So at random moments during the day, people were asked, "Are you happy, stressed, whatever?" And we did a whole lot of other things like GPS tracking, and we could see text messaging and stuff. A colleague of mine is working on this now, and I think these data are now or very soon will be publicly available. And this was for people in the list panel, people with their own mobile phone. It was an app on their phone, and people who did not have a smartphone they got a smartphone. So we did some experiments, and then we did a year-long survey where we also asked people if they had been, like the same random method, whether they had been active on social media at random time moments and stuff. So I think it's an extremely rich data source.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you want to respond to that, or?
No, she's a part of the future. The future starts today. So actually, the future.
And the Netherlands, I think, are usually at the forefront, really, of these kinds of methods, and feels also developing, I think, mobile survey methods, right?
There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment, and I'm actually considering seeing whether we can invite somebody for next year to present on such developments as well, because I think that's quite interesting for many people who are like starting with survey methodology and are kind of technically very open-minded and interested. Of course, you cannot probably yet teach a course for a whole week on this, but having a kind of insight into things that are going on and challenges, I think that would be quite interesting. Further questions? Comments?
Hello. I was also thinking of activities that you may, I don't know, like if you see the first day you feeling like I spend a lot of time texting or talking on the phone, and then like I realized like, oh my god, like my day is looking pretty useless like a lot of the time. So the next day you're just like, well, I'll try to not text, you know, like I'll try. So I think there's like some conditioning in specific activities that you realize that you are spending so much time and you don't want to spend time on that. So like I don't know how you would account for that. But by the third day or the second day, you might have changed a little bit your behavior.
Does this relate now to the bias? So in this way, later, if you remember on that day, if you ask to to fill in after some days, would you say then you would have a better memory for these activities, or you would just say, okay, I forgot them, it was useless to do that, and so I want to like, so is this an argument for bias, what you
I think it would be more like I fill it in now, like during the, say, day one, I fill it in.
Yeah.
By the end of the day, I realized like, oh, like actually like a lot of my time went speaking on the phone. So you just like became conscious about that and then adapt your behavior for the next days.
I see.
And then you like, so I don't know like a solution, but like in certain activities, I would think you will become conscious of how much time you spent on improductivity.
Okay.
I think that's a very interesting comment, because it sounds a bit like, yeah, filling in the diary may be a bit like an intervention, making people aware of how they spent their time, and then you get like forward bias, right? I mean, you change, it's very reactive kind of method. Yeah, since you have something directly to say.
We saw something like that in a regular time use survey we did a while ago, and there one of the people who completed the questionnaire said, I never realized I spent so much time on household chores, and I only saw this when filling in the diary, and I told my husband, and now I have a cleaner.
Awesome. I like those anecdotes from the real world of survey research sometimes. Thanks, Ineke. Hard to deal with, I think, research-wise. So
yeah, I think this is inspiring. So one could now correlate, so to say, this. What if there is split, not split, I don't know the English word, so if there's a connection between the activities of one day to the next day, to look for if,
so people stop teleshopping.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah, okay. If this is systematic, I think, yeah, it's an interesting question. So many questions with this data. Yeah.
Thank you once again for your talk. It was really interesting. And my question is more a clarification question, because I have never worked with this data set. So I was wondering, because you looked more at the memory of the event, of the activity, and the overall time spent. Is there any data also on the moods or emotions? Coming back to Kahneman and Schwartz, which you can take a look at, because that would also be very interesting to look at as a determinant of filling in the data later on, what Corinna already mentioned, like what...
I think in the recent surveys of time use also in France, as far as I know, this Kahneman idea was very influential in subjective well-being calculation of indices. So I think even the German statistic, they incorporated, I don't know exactly, but I think they made a kind of a slim instrument of this DRM actually to do this by telephone, by phone surveys. See. I'm not sure. I think in these past surveys we have only some questions on satisfaction, the traditional way of measuring moods or feelings, and related to specific domains of activity. Are you very satisfied with your leisure activities, with job, with family? And so I did also try to make a correlation between the structure, the daily structure of leisure activities and the satisfaction. So, and find, of course, the more variation, we have a kind of complexity indices, the more satisfaction you are with your leisure time. So this is very small approach to, but I think that the recent surveys, maybe we have to go to US data. I think they are now available for the last one. They have this type of. Yeah.
Coming back to the analysis that you did, have you thought about also checking whether there are any gender differences in the bias, so that people would, according to their kind of typical roles in the household, more forget about household or childcare activities, or you know what I mean? That could be quite interesting if there's gender bias in reporting also influenced by the time gap in between. Have you looked at that already?
I did not do this, but this, of course, this is on the agenda to see if some, and more interesting would be to see if this bias, gender in activity, time use are maybe conditioned by this specific, but gender-specific filling in. So, yeah, to control for that and to see.
Great. And one more question that I also had was that the questionnaire item that asks people about when they filled in the diary is also, I think, maybe susceptible to social desirability, because you gave clear instructions, please fill it in now and then. So people may actually say, yes, I did fill it in now and then, even if they didn't. Is there any indication that you could have about how, while people actually do, of course, sometimes say that they do it very good?
I think this result relates to your question. So this is the prevalence, if you do the activity, yes or no. And one of the activities was taking a diary. Yeah? And we have a negative effect of doing the entries, the filling in some days later after the diary. This means some people don't, those who postpone this filling in some days, they don't write that they did the diary, you see. So this points to my opinion that maybe because of social desirability, they didn't want to show that actually they don't follow the recommendations. And this might be a statistical hint to that.
Great. Do we have more questions? That's the other luxury, right? When you have a bit more time than at a conference typically, that you can discuss in much more detail and get more feedback also.
Yes, this is very valuable, yeah.
Which is quite helpful. So any other questions, or should we continue discussing this topic over some drinks maybe? Well, looks a bit like it. So I would like to thank you very much again, Dr. Papastefanou, for giving the talk here at the summer school. And I also very much hope that GESIS will be successful in getting access to the more recent data soon, so that we can provide access to the research community and then also check what has changed in the terms of methods between 2001 and 2012. And you can guess that by 2022, we probably have no idea today what kind of methods will be available then, because things sometimes change so quickly. But so exciting times ahead also for time use research. And thank you very much again.
Thank you.